think we should have,
So we have 10 minutes of discussion about all these three speeches. And after we take a coffee and come back here 4:30 to continue the other session. Do you have questions, comments?
Is that slide going to be available?
yes.
Thank you. Okay.
The First Lady.
You have a hand up.
Grabois, no,
First Lady Edwards.
the First Lady, Donna, please,
Yeah.
Donna.
Thank you so much. To the Reverend's point of elaborating on wages, we find that year after year, we cannot pass legislation to raise the pay for minimum wage. We have started in 2016 and cannot get it through. We even said, we won't even tell you what we want to raise it to. You give us, what you think. And we cannot even raise it to the slightest, not even 50 cents above $7.25 per hour. However, statewide polling shows that raising the minimum wage is popular among all parties. So we have to conclude that the legislators, which are elected, obviously, to represent these same constituents, must be influenced by some outside entity, right? So I'm going to suggest these outside influencers would be lobbyists for those in large business communities, which we love our business community, don't get me wrong, but they need to be encouraged to do the right thing. And these businesses choose to take this position from their own fear. And I believe it's the fear of being without money. And however, they're allowed to continue to build their own dynasties on the backs of others that are forced to live in poverty because of the weaknesses of these politicians that are elected. So I just wanted to say to the Reverend, thank you for your comments on that. They're well received.
Madam First Lady from Louisiana, right?
Yes.
Please,
Yeah, I think.
please, could be more near to the microphone. Your collaborator, please.
I think that one of the other factors that we also have to raise is that the poorest states in the United States are in the South. And if you take those states from Maryland across Texas, including Louisiana, you end up with about 168 electoral college votes, which means you only need about 90 or whatever that number is from the other 30 some odd states. But there has been, we also have to factor in the racial piece, and that the argument oftentimes against union, the South, like Alabama, they used to be heavily union until the union started including Black people and brown people and indigenous people. And then the bosses would argue against the unions. And the argument they would use, well, you don't want this Black person, this brown person to be making the same thing as you. So there is both a deep racialized, a racial and an economic piece. It's the greed, that Southern aristocracy, because it makes no sense for Southern politicians that have the poorest, lowest wages, the lowest access to healthcare, to stand against raising the minimum wage, especially when you do the polling and the people want a raise. That's the crazy thing. The people, Black or white, whoever they are, want the elevated raise, but the Southern aristocracy, the politicians in the South who are committed to the major business owners and corporate funds care more about that than they do about the people. And they use anti-labor rhetoric and and pro-racist language together. They just code it, it's just coded language. They don't say it as openly, but it's very coded. So I'm with you as my Southern friend. We got work to do down South.
If I could join in on this discussion, the strangeness of it. The other basic way to raise living standards of workers is by expanding, improving the tax code for low-wage workers, for giving more tax credits, earned income tax credit, and other benefits. This is exactly the kind of thing that is in Biden's package right now. But who is the biggest opponent of that? It's all the Southern senators who are dead set against it. Now, that's not even an argument about the labor market. That's an argument about taxing the richest people. Who are the richest people in the United States? I can tell you, I can see them out my window because I live in New York City. So if I peer a little bit down downtown, we have the highest concentration of billionaires in the world. We should tax them. Who doesn't want to tax them? The senators of the poorest states. It makes no real sense except when one thinks about how the political system works. But we don't have in the US the poor states voting for taxing the rich states. We have the weird politics that the richer states want to raise the taxes to help solve national poverty, but it's the poorer states that where the representatives are against it. Of course, we can dissect the interests that are involved, but it's completely weird. And I can tell you personally, I mean, not personally, but from my observations down the block, these people can pay more taxes. It's just unbelievable. All of their discussions are from the Hamptons and who's going to have more cases of their wine cellar, 70,000 or 90,000 or 100,000 cases in their wine cellar, and how big their mansions are and how big their bonuses are. I know it because I hear these discussions. It's unbelievable. And then when it comes time to tax them, it is the representatives of the poorest states in the country that say, no way, we're against taxation. And this is the real weird situation we're facing. It would be normal for Louisiana to be saying those New Yorkers need to pay their taxes.
That's right.
And then we could say, no way we're going to pay for Louisiana. But it's exactly the opposite. It is New York senator trying to pass higher taxes and being told, no way, we can't afford that. So it's just, it is our weird situation that is bringing our country to a breaking point. And Senator Manchin, of all people, he represents the poorest state in the country. And he's the one blocking this agreement right now. So it's,
Jeffrey,
but you know better than I do,
I just want to
Reverend.
make one quick point, because I don't want to also, and I'm probably going to get knocked about this, but that's all right. I don't even want to put it all on the blame of the white Southerners. The civil rights organizations have left connecting economics and voting. When Jeff Manchin, what's his name? Right, that's the name? Joe Manchin.
Joe Manchin. If you were a Jeff, we'd get this voted.
When Joe Manchin and Sinema stood on the floor and basically said no to a $15 minimum wage, and the Democratic Party allowed that to be taken out of the reconciliation bill. You know, if it had stayed in, a black vice president could have overruled the problem. It's complicated, but in other words, it could have gone forward. There was hardly any outcry from the black civil rights groups. But that was one of the most racist votes ever in the history of America. When she danced, because if that vote had taken place and 15 was in that package, 40% of African Americans would have been raised out of low wage. 40%. So one of the things that we have is just this morning, there's an article out from some crazy Harvard scholars suggesting that we don't really need a moral movement. They're trying to pit me and Tracy Abrams against each other.
Oh.
And saying that what we need is a quiet, more politically registering voting group, not a moral, intense, high profile. And doesn't even realize that our movement in Moral Monday wasn't even about just democratic electoral politics. But my point is, remember, King was ostracized by the civil rights community when he connected war, poverty, and racism. Every major civil rights group wrote resolutions against him. And as we sit around this table, I hate to report, but we were approached recently by very powerful politicians, some of which you know, some out of your state, that asked us as a campaign to talk about voting rights, but not talk about living wages. They said that if you have a gathering and not to go to Joe Manchin's state and organize poor and low wealth white people to demand both voting rights and living wages. We were asked to bifurcate by some of the people we look to for allies. So we got this crazy kind of psychosis in our political, and it's not just one blame. You know, I think that one of the great failures of Black civil rights groups, the caucus, some of the other caucuses, Latino other, is that the economic piece is not front and center. Like, how do you have a Black caucus and 60.9% of Black people are poor and low wealth in America, and all of the Black poverty around the world, and that's not the centerpiece? Now, sometimes my liberal white friends won't say that because of some kind of fear that we can't criticize Black leadership, but we better criticize Black leadership, white leadership, brown leadership, indigenous leadership, whatever leadership.
Excellency, we can come back to this discussion, the general discussion, because in the country it's American discussion. Okay, so it's okay.
He said American.
America is very important.
Well, we create so many
there are other
problems.
problems. So sorry, we come back.
I'm sorry.
No. I want to ask to Grabois, what is this idea? I think it's very interesting, but in application concretely, the planning, the idea of planning. Is Grabois in the I don't know, is Grabois?
No, you have to go.
Okay, sorry. No, sorry, I don't have this question. So you can come back to the American discussion, please.
I would like to ask Monsignor if anybody heard in my, I'm asking for a comment on the June 18th feast next year, 2022. You know, I put that in as a way of organizing because we've not had a major gathering of the poor in the world.
Well, I think it's the most exciting thing. So we're going to talk about that after the break.
All right.
That is just sinking in as an incredible.
Yeah, this is very important. So more question? Rocco, and after Rossi.
I can try to build a bridge between the United States and Europe.
Build it.
Because the issue of the minimum wage is an important one, a burning one in Europe too. And because if you raise the wages, you are likely to restrict the offer of jobs because a certain number of companies will not be able to hire people with higher wages, and they are likely not to hire people. That was the great difficulty that we have had. And I suggest, I beg your pardon for saying this, but sometimes you can learn something from the Germans because they have found a very interesting solutions. Jobs that do not pay a living salary are called mini jobs. And those who offer to the people mini jobs for a full salary receive a certain number of significant fiscal benefits that make it equal for them, that allow them to do this without running the risk of getting out of the market. Or other possible solution is the state pays an allowance to those who have a mini job so that they get, on the one hand, the money of the entrepreneur, of the company. On the other hand, they get this allowance of the state. And it is good also financially, because otherwise they should be on state welfare. So when they have a mini job, they cost less than when they are on social welfare. It is more complicated than this, of course, but it is interesting because as Jeff correctly said, it is the rich who should pay for the minimum salary. But the employers of people who have very low salaries very often are not rich. They are they have a drugstore, they have a very small company or no company at all. They are individual entrepreneurs. So I think it should be studied very well. And there are interesting solutions that have been developed in the German experience.
Mhm.
Please.
We are all called by God to release the slaves. And since Egypt, we have seen that the countries that has done that has become prosperous. They have entered to the promised land. Even England, William Wilberforce, when he succeeded, England became very prosperous, the same as the United States. But the same is happening in the south of the United States. It's full of brothels, strip clubs, and places where very many of our Mexicans that are missing from our country are taken to the United States. And if they escape, also some of them will be put in jail because they are the ones who are prostitutes and they were taken by pimps. But I think it's so important. I was in Congress, I was Congresswoman, I passed the law in Mexico. Our law protects so much the vulnerables, but also there is a lobbying, a horrible lobbying, even inside of the Mexican United States Embassy. I denounced that in a newspaper because they were trying to undermine our law, to undermine it says. So it's very important also to pass laws. In the United States, a senator from North Carolina told me that it was very difficult for them because people that owns these big places for prostitution in the United States, even though it's forbidden, it's full of them. I can see them in Florida. And I have said in Mexico, we have 3 governors who have closed completely all those places. And all the corruption comes down because it's the rich people who can buy the poor people. And it's there where comes all the corruption because they take the Congress people, they take the senators to these places. They corrupted them by taking a little girl in their lap and taking a picture. And then all the police and everybody will go corrupted. So it's so important for ending poverty to end with these horrible places that exist. Germany is going to do it. Amsterdam is closing these windows. We should all raise our voice for the ones that are now in the hands of Pharaoh.
These are the real structure of sin in the plenum sensus. So
Yeah.
Yep.
I just wanted to relate to what Reverend Barber was saying, and something that I thought might come up yesterday, I'm just mentioning, which is the more general philosophical question of why people vote against their interests. Which, you know, if you're talking about a broken system, then that's not a relevant question. But if it's not only the broken system, but it's something about, there can be deep reasons that sometimes people need help to flesh out. And that's an educational perspective and often even theological to help people understand what's in their interests, not from a paternalistic perspective, but understanding what they, you know, undermining the paternalistic perspective that they've already internalized.
Yeah, one of the, I might respond to may I respond to his question?
Please.
One of the things we're finding is a strange dynamic. The politicians, particularly in these poor straight, vote against the interests of the people. The people don't often vote against their own interests. We have been told that poor, for instance, white people vote, like the narrative is they vote for Trumpians. They vote for, the data is they don't. The data is that actually they don't vote. When they tend to vote, they tend to vote progressively. We did a study with some folk for Columbia University and called Unleashing the Power of Poor and Low Wealth Voters. We found out that the #1 reason poor and low wealth people don't vote, period, is because nobody talks to them. They don't hear anybody in the political square talking about poverty, talking about, and their real issue. But when they do vote, they vote more progressive. So what we have in the South is a whole lot of unorganized states, not even necessarily red states, but we're told that narrative, CNN and red state, red states, red. In 15 states in our country, there's 64 million poor and low wealth people. 36 million voted in the last election, 29 million didn't. But in 15 states, if 1 to 25% of poor and low wealth people were organized around agenda, not 30%, 40%, just 1% in Michigan, 4% in Georgia, 4% in Florida, 7% in Georgia, 19% in North Carolina. And they voted on an agenda, and they had an agenda worth voting for. They could fundamentally shift who sits in office. That narrative is often, so what happens, people often insult poor people. These folks fool them. They suppress their vote, they don't talk to them, then they get the power, the politicians, and then they are the ones that vote against the poor people's own self-interest, but they are voting for their self-interest. Because like Manchin, they get all the money they want. And that's what we're trying to break in this block in our country.
There's one more dimension to add to this. Again, maybe US specific in some ways, but not so US specific. And that is that even when you have the representatives in Congress, as we had in the last few weeks, inside the closed door, behind the closed doors, they gutted key provisions of the overall proposal to lower drug prices, to raise the corporate income tax, and so on. These were, in this case, the Republicans, who are nearly half, but the Democrats have a majority, they're against 100%. But on the president's side, he could not hold his own party together, because those who are ostensibly representing something more progressive, in fact, after their campaigns and all the rest, easily are able to do what they want, more or less with impunity,